Romania didn't protect Moldova. Romania destroyed the way Russia controls Moldova, not with tanks, not with threats, not with a border move. By removing the handles Moscow grabs when it wants to slow a country down. That's what makes this story dangerous. It's quiet, it's legal, it's already happening, and once it locks in, Russia can't reverse it without paying a price it can't afford. Most people think Russia's Moldova strategy is about invading. It never needed to be. Moscow's real plan was always simpler than that, and it worked for decades because it didn't require headlines. Moldova stays dependent, Moldova stays divided, Moldova stays anxious. A frozen conflict stays frozen just long enough to keep the whole country politically stuck. Then elections do the rest. The problem for Russia is that this plan only works while the system around Moldova stays weak. Romania is making sure it doesn't. Now watch how you can actually see the moment this clicked for Moscow. In mid-January 2026, Moldova's president Maia Sandu said something no Moldovan president had ever said this directly. If a referendum happened, she would vote for unification with Romania. She didn't frame it as romance or nostalgia. She framed it as survival, a small state trying to remain democratic, sovereign, and able to resist Russia. That sentence matters because it signals something Russia counts on. Fear is fading, not fear in the public, not fear in every region, not fear everywhere all at once. Fear at the top, the kind that usually keeps leaders speaking in careful half language, because they assume Moscow can still punish them. When a head of state says it out loud anyway, the calculation has already shifted, and here's the part most people miss. That statement didn't land in a vacuum. It landed at the exact moment Romania was doing something far more concrete than rhetoric. Romania put numbers on paper, a massive investment plan tied to Europe's Security Action for Europe instrument, with a procurement list that drew attention for weapons, radars, air defenses, helicopters, the sort of things people expect in military coverage. But the strategic punch wasn't the missiles. It was the roads. Billions earmarked for dual-use infrastructure aimed east, including motorways explicitly linked to the Moldova direction. The kind of spending that looks civilian until you imagine a crisis and ask one simple question. How fast can help physically arrive? Once you build the route, you're not debating the concept anymore. You've turned a political intention into a mechanical capability. You can roll it back in speeches. You can't roll it back in asphalt. Russia's leverage relies on delay in energy, delay in institutions, delay in security alignment, delay in elections, because time is what makes small states crack. Romania's countermove accelerates the timeline until Russia's old pressure points stop working. That's the core. Now it gets sharper. Because Moldova is constitutionally neutral. That's the obstacle Russia has always leaned on. The argument writes itself. Moldova can't join NATO, therefore Moldova must remain a soft space. Therefore, Russian influence remains structurally protected. Romania's answer is to bypass the argument entirely. In late January 2026, Romania's Chief of Defense Staff, General Gheorghiță Vlad, was asked what happens if Moldova faces conflict. His answer was clean. NATO is not automatically involved in defending Moldova. He acknowledged that reality. Then he added the part Moscow doesn't like. A coalition of the willing can still form, following the model being formed for Ukraine. That is a strategic unlock. It takes Moldova's neutrality, which Russia treats like a shield against Western integration, and turns it into a technicality, the kind you route around. It also changes the deterrence picture without waving a NATO flag, which is exactly why it's effective. Moscow can't point to a treaty. It can't point to a vote. It can't point to a formal enlargement. All it can point to is a neighbor building a reality where assistance becomes normal. Now the story moves from words to architecture, because coalition language is only credible if the planning exists. It does. There is a coordination format that has been publicly described as the Moldova Security Assistance Roundtable, described as Romanian-led, with US-European Command linked reporting around staff talks and the roundtable kicking off. Call it what it is: a planning rhythm, a structure where defense policy, capability development, training priorities can be discussed and aligned without requiring Moldova to be in NATO and without requiring NATO to move as a single bloc. That matters because Russia's hybrid strategy depends on isolating targets. Keep them alone, keep them unsure, keep them reactive, keep their partners arguing. Coordination breaks that. It doesn't make Moldova invincible. It makes Moldova harder to manipulate quickly, which is what Russia needs in order to win with hybrid tactics. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, hit like and subscribe now, because this shift isn't slowing down and most people won't see it until it's too late. Now the damage shows, because from this point forward, the map no longer responds to Moscow the way it used to. Russia has two kinds of influence. The influence everyone talks about, which is propaganda and proxies. The influence that actually bites, which is leverage you can pull instantly when you want something. Energy is one of those levers. Election capture is another. A frozen conflict is the third, because it creates uncertainty that poisons every strategic decision. Romania can't erase Russia's assets inside Moldova overnight. What it can do is remove the effect. If Moldova has alternative energy channels, Moscow loses the panic button. If Moldova gets better at defending elections, the proxy strategy becomes expensive and unreliable. If infrastructure and interoperability deepen, the frozen conflict stops being a veto and starts being a nuisance that can be contained. The more Moscow reacts, the faster the dynamic shifts against it. Attempts to apply pressure no longer create hesitation inside Moldova. They tighten alignment, accelerate coordination, and invite deeper involvement from Romania, the EU, and external partners. What was once destabilization now produces reinforcement. This is what Russia loses when it loses timing. It doesn't just lose an argument, it loses the ability to control the pace of events. Now, the focus narrows because Russia didn't lose Moldova all at once. It lost the tools it used to control it. There were 3 of them. Each looked untouchable. Each worked for years, and each is now being turned against Moscow in ways Russia didn't prepare for. It starts with the one the Kremlin trusted most: energy. Energy was never just about heat. For Moscow, it was timing control, the ability to apply pressure exactly when a small state was weakest, then pull back before the damage became irreversible. Gas cutoffs didn't need to last forever. They only needed to land at the right moment. Before elections, during winter, in the middle of a budget crisis, long enough to force compromises that could be reversed later. That model worked in Moldova for years because there were no real alternatives. Romania changed that by doing something Russia doesn't like to compete with: infrastructure. Instead of arguing about contracts or blaming Gazprom publicly, Romania focused on physical replacement: interconnectors, reverse flow capacity, electricity synchronization, boring projects that don't trend on social media but permanently alter leverage. Once Moldova could physically receive gas and power from Romania and the EU market, the threat shifted. A cutoff stopped being a crisis trigger and became a political gesture, something Moscow could still do but no longer rely on to produce panic. That difference matters more than people realize. Energy coercion only works when uncertainty exists about what happens next, when households don't know if heating will continue, when governments don't know if industry can function. Once contingency becomes normal, fear evaporates. And fear was the point. By 2024 and 2025, Moldova wasn't just surviving Russian energy pressure, it was planning around it, budgeting for it, publicly treating it as expected behavior rather than an emergency. That psychological shift alone weakens coercion more than any sanction. Romania's role in this wasn't symbolic. It acted as the stabilizing backstop that Moscow couldn't touch without escalating into direct confrontation with an EU and NATO member. That forced Russia into a dilemma it hates: escalate and trigger a bigger response, or accept that the lever no longer moves the system the way it used to. Russia chose neither. It kept pulling the lever anyway, and every time it did, it trained Moldova's institutions and population to absorb the shock faster. That's how a pressure tool becomes a liability. The more you use it, the less effective it becomes, until the only thing it proves is intent. By the time winter pressure cycles came around again, the outcome was different. No political collapse, no emergency concessions, no reversal of EU alignment, just another confirmation that dependency was no longer absolute. Russia didn't lose the ability to cut energy. It lost the ability to control outcomes by doing so. Once that leverage disappeared, the entire logic behind its hybrid strategy stopped working, and energy was only one handle. The next was quieter, more aggressive, and far more dangerous when it worked. Elections. Energy pressure breaks governments from the outside. Election capture breaks them from within. For Moscow, this was the cleaner tool. Less visible, less risky, far more effective when it worked. You don't need tanks if you can install paralysis. You don't need invasion if the state argues with itself at the worst possible moments. That was the bet in Moldova. Flood the information space, fund proxies, create just enough doubt around legitimacy that every decision becomes contested, then wait for fatigue to do the rest. What Russia didn't account for was how fast that playbook would be exposed once it stopped being subtle. By the time Moldova approached its 2024 and 2025 election cycles, Russian interference wasn't theoretical anymore. It was explicit. Deepfake campaigns, financial pipelines tied to pro-Kremlin figures, coordinated narratives designed to paint EU integration as occupation rather than choice. The numbers matter here. Hundreds of millions of euros spent trying to bend a country of 2.4 million people back into Moscow's orbit. That kind of effort only makes sense if the prize is strategic. And that's where Romania enters the picture again. Not as a loud defender, but as a stabilizer. Instead of responding with counter-propaganda alone, Romania and its partners focused on shielding the process itself. Cybersecurity assistance, election monitoring, institutional hardening, the kind of support that doesn't tell people how to vote, but makes it harder to steal the vote once they do. That distinction is crucial. Russia's interference model depends on speed and confusion. It works best when authorities are reactive, fragmented, and unsure how far they can go without being accused of repression. Once election defense becomes normalized, interference stops being decisive and starts becoming evidence. And evidence changes the narrative. Instead of debates about both sides, Moldova's leadership could point to documented attempts at manipulation. Instead of being defensive, they went on offense, publicly framing Russia as the source of instability rather than an unavoidable neighbor. That shift shows up in outcomes. Despite massive pressure, pro-European leadership held. Parliamentary majorities survived. The expectation in Moscow that Moldova would eventually flip through ballots didn't materialize. More importantly, it stopped being assumed. Russia can still interfere, it can still spend money, it can still push narratives. What it can't do anymore is rely on elections as a predictable reset button. Once a state proves it can absorb interference without collapsing politically, the tool loses reliability. And unreliable tools don't anchor strategy. This is the second failure point. Russia didn't lose because Moldova became immune to manipulation. It lost because manipulation stopped producing control. And that brings us to the final lever Moscow depended on, the one that was supposed to guarantee permanent influence, even if everything else failed. Transnistria. For years, Transnistria was Moscow's insurance policy. If energy pressure failed, it was there. If elections went the wrong way, it was there. If Moldova leaned too far west, the threat didn't need to be spoken. Everyone already understood it. A strip of territory packed with Russian troops, sitting just far enough inside Moldova to keep the entire country strategically nervous. The value of Transnistria was never its firepower. It was its ambiguity. Russia didn't have to use it. It only had to leave it unresolved. That uncertainty poisoned long-term planning, scared off investment, and gave Moscow a permanent veto over Moldova's future. That's the part that broke. Not because Transnistria disappeared, because its function changed. Once Moldova's energy dependence weakened and elections stopped flipping outcomes, the frozen conflict stopped acting like leverage and started behaving like ballast, a static liability Russia had to maintain while its influence elsewhere declined. Romania's role here is indirect, which is exactly why it works. Instead of confronting Transnistria directly, Romania worked around it. Trade routes shifted west. Security cooperation strengthened Moldova without breaking neutrality. Economic integration kept the rest of the country functioning even while the enclave remained frozen. That changed the logic. Frozen conflicts only work when the surrounding state stays fragile. Once the system stabilizes, the conflict stops being leverage and starts being friction. Russia still has forces in Transnistria, but they're isolated, narrowly supplied, and boxed in by Ukraine on one side and a no longer alone Moldova on the other. Any attempt to activate them would widen the conflict in ways Moscow can't manage while stretched elsewhere. So Transnistria remains, but it no longer freezes the future. Russia didn't lose its tools, it lost their coordination. Energy pressure no longer produces panic. Interference no longer decides elections. Frozen conflicts no longer halt integration. Hybrid warfare only works when timing, pressure, and uncertainty reinforce each other. Once that alignment breaks, influence turns into noise. Romania didn't force a confrontation. It replaced the environment Russia depended on. Infrastructure that can't be undone. Security cooperation that doesn't need treaties. Energy links that function regardless of threats. Institutions that don't collapse under pressure. That's why this isn't reversible. Moldova isn't safe, but it's no longer controllable on Russia's terms. And once that happens, the old playbook is finished.